If you're a professional brewer, you know how frustrating it can be when you go to place a yeast order and what you're looking for is out of stock. Well, Imperial Yeast is here to help by guaranteeing that commercial orders up to 20 liters of 10, yes, 10 of their most popular strains will ship free if they're not in stock when you place your order. Some of these strains include A38 Juice for those hazy IPAs, A07 Flagship, a classic in clean American styles, L13 Global, which is said to be one of the world's most popular lager strains, A44 Kviking for your warm fermented beers, and so many more. So in addition to pitching right with the highest quality yeast on the market, they're promising that yeast will be ready when you need it, or shipping is on them. Whether you're a pro or a home brewer, if you haven't tried Imperial Yeast in your brewery, it's time to up your game. You can check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and place your commercial orders at imperialyeast.com. Since dropping the first episode of this podcast way back in March of 2017, we've talked about more than 100 experiments we've performed. We've shared our views and experiences on various interesting topics, and we've gone over a bunch of our attempts to brew beers using short and shoddy methods. Considering our average episode length is a little over an hour, you've listened to us talk about beer and brewing for over 350 hours combined. Yeesh! This is the 300th episode of the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and this week I'm joined by contributor Will Lovell for a sort of special edition of our Brü A series. We talked about it in a prior episode. We're going to be focusing solely on questions asked by our patrons, those people who appreciate what we're doing enough to throw a couple bucks our way each month. Will, how are you feeling about this one?
Man, I am I feel real honored to be a part of the 300th episode. I've only been a part of this ride as a contributor for about the last year and a half or so, and so it's really kind of a cool thing to get on here. And I know that 300 has to feel like an amazing milestone for you, Marshall, and it feels pretty awesome to me too.
Yeah, 300 episodes. I know that it's not, your 100th episode or your 500th episode, which for some reason those numbers hold a little bit more meaning. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. These Brü A episodes are always a lot of fun, but I'm particularly excited about this one as we specifically requested that our patrons ask at least some questions that aren't necessarily brewing related, or maybe they're a little bit, brewing and beer related, but they have a little offshoot thing. And they did just that. Obviously, this is a podcast about brewing and beer, so there's going to be, a few questions about that stuff as well. One thing I need to point out is that when we sent out the message to our patrons a couple weeks ago, asking them to ask us questions, I did not expect to get nearly as many as we did. I was fully prepared to respond to a few more questions than we usually do, but we ended up getting around 50 questions submitted, which obviously is way too many for us to get to on a single episode. So since our patrons really are the reason we're able to keep doing this thing, we've decided to prioritize their questions. So the ones that we don't get to today will be featured on a future Brü A episode. All right, speaking of our patrons, if you are a fan of this show and would like to receive a reward for your support, as well as the ability to submit questions like this, please consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. By making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. This month's guest is one of the biggest names in homebrewing, I think in most of our opinions, author, podcast host, and friend of Brülosophy, John Palmer. If you haven't personally read his book, How to Brew, I'm almost certain whoever you learned to brew from likely did. Suffice to say, John's influence on this hobby is undeniable, and we're thrilled that he agreed to come back for a second Q&A session with patrons of Brülosophy. If you want to be a part of it, you have to make your pledge over at patreon.com/Brülosophy by Friday, September 29th, 2023, as John's going to be taking questions that Saturday, the 30th. All past sessions are available on our private Patreon and Facebook pages, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brülosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your experience at places like Amazon and More Beer and such really won't change at all, and we get a little bit of a commission for that referral. It is, a very small commission, but every little bit counts. Finally, if you wouldn't mind, please take a few seconds to leave a rating and review of this show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts. We really do appreciate what you guys have to say about us. We read every single review that we see, at least, but those reviews also help folks who have yet to hear of the Brülosophy podcast to more easily find the show. All right, feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who are known for their incredible all-in-one electric brewing systems. I've brewed on both their 120 and 240 volt systems, and these things are absolutely legit, efficient, easy to use. With a relatively small footprint, you're not going to be disappointed with one of these units. Plus, the guys behind the company run an amazing YouTube channel, which you can find by searching YouTube for Clawhammer Supply. If you're in the market for electric brewing gear or even just reasonably priced kettles and such, make sure to check out what Clawhammer Supply has to offer at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to let them know Brulosophy sent you when you're checking out. That's clawhammersupply.com. Listener Lee Brown hit us up with some very kind words. Lee says, I just wanted to say a huge thank you for not only helping to develop my brewing knowledge, but also getting me through a tough time in my life. I started listening to Brulosophy a few years ago, and I've binged all episodes. The podcast has taught me not to fret too much about everything. If it works for you, it works. No one ever complains about my beers. Furthermore, during this period, I first lost my mother to cancer, and then a year later, my father to a heart attack. Tough times. As strange as it sounds, the familiarity of Brulosophy helped me to go to a headspace that allowed me to enjoy my life in those most testing of times. I thought I'd reach out to let you know, as I run a Tottenham Hotspur, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Tottenham Hotspur, which is a soccer podcast in the UK. It's called the VAR, in all caps, Side Spurs Pubcast. And I rarely get feedback. I never really know if people love or hate it, and I wanted you to know that Brulosophy goes beyond just the beer. Finally, boy, do I miss the Jersey and Tim segments.
So first of all, my condolences for what you've been going through. That sounds like a really tough time. I know many of us have lost loved ones, and while I have yet to lose a mother and a father, much less so close to one another, that sounds rough. I'm very glad to know that what we do goes beyond beer, goes beyond brewing, and I'm happy that at least in some way this entertainment that we're doing, these experiments that we're doing, this whole thing that we're doing got you through a tough time, gave you some comfort, and it's really cool to hear that kind of feedback and that kind of impact, because it's not something that I think of off the top of my head. So thank you for that. Also, it's really cool that you're on a Tottenham podcast. I'm sure Harry Kane going to the Bundesliga and Bayern has been a big topic of discussion for you. So that's pretty cool as well. But hey, man, I'm happy that you're brewing has, and some of these nice memories have been what the positive sparks that have gotten you through a tough time, and I'm glad that we were here for that.
Yeah, Lee, I'm so sorry for your losses as well. I mean, tough times indeed. And like Will said, I'm so glad that us blowhards over here could provide you some sense of solace during those times. I can totally relate. I've had losses in my life and such, and it's weird the things that we find comfort in during those times. Hearing a familiar voice who you can kind of rely on to provide a familiar approach to something that you enjoy doing. In this case, that's beer and brewing. I just think that's really cool to hear. It's funny. I regularly comment that this is just beer, right? And that's typically in response to people complaining about something we've done. But I do have to accept that for those who enjoy the show and appreciate what it is that we are doing, it can definitely be more than that. I mentioned on our last experience episode that I felt a sense of obligation to keep producing content during the worst parts of the whole COVID pandemic and the lockdowns and such. And that was definitely motivated by my awareness that we're providing something beyond just brewing and beer talk. It's entertainment, and in some cases, we're learning it can be a sense of comfort as well. So thank you so much for the kind words, Lee. We appreciate you immensely, as we do all of our listeners. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. Alrighty, when we return from this break, answers to patron questions. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brulosophy sent you. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BRUPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com.
Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this basketball season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. You can turn $10 into $250. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/fan and use code FAN. That's code FAN at prizepicks.com/fan.
Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
Like I mentioned before, we ended up receiving a ton of questions, far too many to cover in this single episode. So if you are a patron whose question does not get answered in this episode, we'll very likely get to it in a future Brü A episode, which will be 2.5 months from now or so. What's cool is that our patrons did ask a fairly good mix of brewing and somewhat non-brewing related questions. So this is going to be a fun one. First up is Justin Hayward, who said, my question relates to bigger ABV beers such as imperial stouts, barley wines that benefit from aging to impart a smoother experience when drinking. I've been told and have also experienced anecdotally that these styles taste less, quote, boozy and harsh when they are given a longer time to age. What process and or reactions are taking place that result in these beers being smoother over time? A disclaimer, by the way, Justin, neither of us consider ourselves actual brewing scientists. Most of what we respond to on these episodes is from personal experience or stuff that we've just learned over the years. Now, with that out of the way, go ahead, Will. What do you think?
Yeah, so it's this is just my understanding, but we know for a fact that there are lots of redox reactions that happen inside of beer. And so kind of my thoughts on this are the same thing that we demonize a lot, oxidation, is also kind of the same thing that helps out some of these bigger beers. So while maybe you don't want that sweetness from hop oxidation or maybe a sherry flavor in your hazy IPA, that could be something that helps balance out a barley wine or an imperial stout over the life of that beer, because it kind of can take some of those more bitter notes and balance it out with the sweetness that you're getting from oxidation in those hops and stuff like that. And then there's probably some other components going on in there as well. I know when I did that short and shoddy triple that there's an article about on the website, I got some kind of interesting phenols, like almost a white peppery note from that particular beer. And I don't know, it's not that it tasted bad or was awful. It just wasn't exactly what I had envisioned. And as over time, over the next month or so, after I'd collected data and all that stuff and was still drinking the beer, that actual peppery note kind of faded out and it turned into more of the triple that I expected. And again, so there's all these kind of redox reactions, oxidation that's happening inside of these bigger beers that, again, may not be what you want for your IPA, but maybe what you want for your barley wines and imperial stouts and Belgian beers.
Yeah, man, you nailed it on the head. That's exactly where I was going to go with this as well. And when you look at it, when somebody makes, I have a friend who for a good couple of years was making every third or fourth batch would be a smaller batch size version of something big. So it'd be a barley wine, or I think he did a wheat wine once, Russian imperial stout. These higher ABV 12 to 15%ers. And I know a lot of people who do this, but he in particular got into a conversation with me about the way he stores those. One, he bottle conditions all of them, or if he's not bottle conditioning them, he's bottling them off of the keg where they were carbonated, and then he puts them into bottles and stores them in a relatively warm environment. Now you think about that. What do we know about redox reactions, oxidation in general, but most chemical reactions, really, I think every chemical reaction, and temperature, that they're positively correlated. So the warmer the temperature, or the warmer the environment, the more active or the quicker that chemical reaction is going to occur. That's the general rule, at least. So we know that these beers are going to have some amount of oxygen in the package. We take as many efforts as we possibly can to reduce that when making certain styles, hazy IPA being a main one. But when you're making these bigger styles, if you're going about your standard process, then yeah, you're going to have some amount of oxygen in there. So in addition to things like particulates falling out of solution, which is absolutely normal for any beer. It's why we lager lagers. In addition to that, you're also having these reactions that are occurring over time that can really start to mold the organoleptic characteristics of a bigger beer like that. And, I mentioned getting into a chat with my friend Sean about this. And our idea is that you are actually, in a weird way, like you said, what we demonize in hoppy beers, we kind of embrace in these bigger beers because it adds character. It gives it that roundness, that uniqueness that you don't get from a fresh Russian Imperial Stout. I've done it myself, and I actually proposed a experiment idea a few years ago. Nobody took me up on it, but I proposed an idea where we package two Imperial Stouts or barley wines or something like that. You package two of those next to each other in more standard, not overdoing the no cold side oxidation techniques. You package them next to each other, store one in the keezer, and you store one warm and let them sit for 6 months, and then do the triangle test on those. Because I'd be curious. I have a feeling that, one, that people will be able to taste a difference, but two, that people are probably going to prefer, knowing that it's some big barley wine or Imperial Stout, they're probably going to prefer the one that was stored warm, because those reactions that we're seeking, ostensibly, are occurring quicker in that one. So you are actually, quote, aging that beer better or quicker by keeping it warm. I really don't know, but that's kind of my understanding. That's how I've always thought about it. And with that, it's always worked out fairly well for me. Now, one little idea that we came up with a while ago, you are, in addition to whatever redox reactions are occurring that we seem to think are contributing to that big beer character that we all enjoy, you are also dropping out particulate. And so one little trick, it's so easy, is to use something like gelatin or biofine, even in these big beers that you are going to age for a while, if your goal is to turn them around a little bit quicker, because you do still want to drop all that stuff out. Anybody who's had a beer that has yeast character in it, that's not, because of actual yeast in suspension, that's not something I tend to enjoy, but just a thought.
Yeah, that's spot on. So, the next question is from Jam Glassman, and he says, since you like getting non-brewing related questions, oh, you have no idea, Jam, you have no idea. What podcast do you listen to outside of the brewing world?
So this is an admission on my part. I listen to podcasts incessantly. There are, these days, given what we do and how, we could drown ourselves in brewing content. And so as my snap back to reality, I tend to focus, this is really weird because I work in a forensic setting. I listen to so much true crime. I'm listening to True Crime Campfire, which, go check that out if you like true crime stuff. The two ladies who host it, Katie and Wendy, or Whitney. I'm sorry, Katie and Whitney they have a really cool vibe, and they tend to take a humorous approach to talking about really less focused on cases and stuff. I like to listen to another show called, what's it called? Anatomy of Murder. Not the hugest fan of the network that they're a part of for a handful of reasons. There's been some claims of plagiarism and such, but that specific show, clearly they're not doing it. They've got their own approach where an detective and I believe she's a prosecutor come together, and they kind of look at different crimes from their perspective, and I love that. Obviously, Dateline is high up on my list. I'm one of those weirdos who has an absolute obsession with Keith Morrison and his way of talking. So as much of his voice as I can get, I like to do that. And then what I'll do if I'm going on a road trip or something, so that's like my weekly, that gets me through my drive to and from work. But if I'm going on road trips and such, I'll find full series podcasts, something like Serial, which was amazing. I mean, I was on that as it was coming out and I couldn't get enough of it. But I'll do that. There was another one, I believe it's called Counterclock. That's kind of a nice, it'll get you through about 8 to 10 hours of driving fairly well. And they're pretty interesting stories, but that's my jam. That's the stuff that I'm fascinated by, and listening to people talk about why they think a criminal committed the crimes that they did may not be the most, happy stuff on earth, but it keeps my brain going. So,
well, I don't drive as much as I used to. I work a lot more from home these days, and so I don't listen to quite as many podcasts as I used to. But I do have to admit that outside of brewing, I'm a little bit of an Enneagram junkie, which is just another personality assessment that's out there. And so I like the Enneagram Journey with Suzanne Stabile. She's from North Texas. She lives in Dallas, and she has like this sweet accent and just sounds kind of like, the grandma you wish you had, sitting there like telling you about what your personality's trying to do through the lens of the Enneagram, which is kind of fun. I also like history podcasts. Every now and again, I like to hit up revisionist history or something like that. But that honestly depends on the topic. Like if it's obviously if it's not a topic I'm interested in, I'm not going to listen to it. So those are kind of two that I go to. But again, I don't listen to quite as many podcasts as I used to, just because I don't have as much windshield time as I used to.
Yeah, that's kind of what keeps me from listening to all of the podcasts I really would like to. Is, I'm driving 40 minutes each way, but most of the true crime podcasts I'm kind of addicted to right now are, that like one episode gets me through one way. And so I've got just enough to last me the whole week. But that's kind of what I like. And the thing is I have other interests. I'm obsessed with music. I play the guitar, I write songs, I do all of that, but I don't listen to like music podcasts. I thought that was an interesting thing, as I was kind of thinking about, well, what are my other interests? What podcasts do I listen to that are aligned with that? It really is just all true crime. And I think the reason for me with that is because it's perspective giving, and that's something that I kind of pine for in my daily life. But it's also, it forces me to kind of zone out, so it makes my drives less miserable. So there is that. The next question comes from Joel, who said, I recently saw a YouTube talking about whether you would still brew beer if you couldn't drink, for health reasons, for example. I found this to be a really interesting question and would love to have your take on it. So Will, you're told by your doctor, you got to stop drinking. This is so bad for your health. You got to be done with this. Are you still going to brew beer even though you can't drink it?
So this is a really dirty version of make-believe that I admittedly don't really like to play, because this is like not something I really want to think about, because I do enjoy beer so much. But if I take a step back, if I have a seat, cool my jets a little bit, I don't know that I would actually. I enjoy beer, and there are lots of things I love about drinking beer, and I would still probably make and drink things like hop water. Maybe if I just got it in my head that I needed to perfect NA beer for some reason, maybe I would go down that route. But so far, I'm not like the hugest fan of NA beers, and the ones that I like are usually ones that use, I guess it's the kind that use a vacuum and kind of suck the alcohol out of suspension at like a pressure. So honestly, I'm not sure that I would. I would still probably enjoy things like hop water and stuff like that, but I probably just switch to drinking fizzy water all the time, honestly.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'd be lying if I said that I could brew a batch of beer and not have any of it. And my thing is, if I'm being told for my health, which when I hear that it has to do with my health, the first thing I think of are my wife and my kids, and I want to be around for them, and I want to be a good example to them. It's the same way I approach drinking in general. Is I want them to witness it. I want them to see that. But if it ever affects my behavior towards them, and if it ever starts to get me in trouble in work or other meaningful aspects of life, that has to be something that I think about, and I'm not going to do it, if that's the case. And so I know for a fact, just because I know who I am, that if I told myself, oh, I know I can't drink it, but I'm going to make it anyways, that would actually be my excuse for drinking when I'm not supposed to be drinking. So I'm 99% confident that if ever I were told I've got to stop drinking beer, that I would not be brewing beer. That being said, I would talk to the doctor about, is it the alcohol or is it the beer? Is it the other stuff in beer that's I'm unhealthy to, or is it or is it just the booze? Because if that's the case, I'd be happy switching over to making cider and experimenting with mead and other things like that. But if I'm getting cut off from alcohol altogether, I'll definitely still be a maker. I already keep sparkling water that we experiment with different flavorings for my family on tap. So that but yeah, I'm certain that would be. I'd still talk about it. I would love to do that because you don't lose your interest, right? But making it and not being able to drink it would be absolute hell for me. So pretty sure I would not be going down that route.
Oof, what a scary question. Okay, so the next one is
Let's
from
move past that now.
Yes, thank you. Bye. So Browse 9030 asks, I've always been curious about ABV and how it impacts hop flavor. My experience has been that higher ABV IPAs, around 7.5%, have been hoppier than their lighter counterparts, around 5.8%. I'm not sure if it's because higher ABV beers tend to be hopped at higher rates, but my theory in the form of a question is, as alcohol is a solvent, is it possible higher ABV beers tend to be more efficient at extracting hop oils from the hops and retaining them in the beer?
So again, to reiterate the disclaimer that we gave previously, we are not hop scientists. That being said, it's very well known, alcohol is a solvent. And so is it possible that the higher amount of alcohol, at which we have to keep in mind, it's really not that much higher. We're talking like 3 to 4, maybe 5% more than a standard IPA. The example Browse 9030 gives here is, his higher ABV IPA at 7.5% versus his lower ABV one at 5.8%. That's not even a full 2% ABV difference. So that delta, in my opinion, is not big enough to explain the higher hopping or the higher hop character that you're getting in these higher ABV beers. But what does explain it really well, as you mentioned here, Browse 9030, is higher hopping rates. If I'm making a double IPA, I'm throwing almost double the amount of hops at that beer at different points during the process, usually late in the kettle and during the dry hop. And that is where we know we're getting the good majority of that hop character, that hop aroma, as well as flavor. So my hunch is that that's the case. Also, if alcohol were as good of a solvent for hop oils as this would seem to suggest, then that's what these hop companies would be relying on, but they're not. They're using CO2. CO2 is the most common thing used to extract these hop oils from hops and such. So I really don't think it's the higher ABV necessarily. Might that be helping on some maybe low detectable level potentially, but I think it just has to do with the fact we're throwing a ton more hops at these higher ABV IPAs than we are the lower ABV versions.
So I do agree with throwing more hops at it. That has to have some kind of impact on the hop flavor and aroma in these beers. And so I have to say like that. I can't say that you can't say that that's not a part of this process. Now, my understanding from my internet degree I got from Google U, I do understand that alcohol, there are certain components inside of an IPA that are more soluble in alcohol than inside of the rest of the other sugary stuff. And there are some people out there that purport that because, you can get a higher ABV beer and because of this higher rate of solubility, you will get more hop flavor and aroma, for something that's like a double IPA kind of strength versus a lower strength beer. Now, again, is there a perceptible difference between that? And is it because of the alcohol for sure? I don't know. I don't have enough of a degree to answer that, but we do know that some components inside of an IPA and hops are more soluble in alcohol. Now, there does seem to be, according to the powers that be on the internet, kind of a diminishing returns once you get up above 10% or so as far as solubility and the impact it has on your beer with those hop oils and components. But it's is it plausible? Sure. Do I think that's it? Or maybe it's probably more to do with the higher hopping rates, though, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, the higher hopping rates and the way those hop compounds, what the oils and such, the terpenes, the way that those interact with the other components of a higher ABV IPA, whether that's the malt or whatever. That we often say this, but it's just so true that your experience of the beer isn't of the separate parts, it's of the entire gestalt, and that meaning the sum, right, is greater than these parts. And I think we have to keep that in mind, that you could do the same exact thing, add a pound of hops or whatever to a 4% beer. Chances are I can almost guarantee it's not going to have the same overall characteristic as a double IPA you made with the same amount of hops. And it may very well be that you end up enjoying the hop character from that higher ABV beer more because of everything else that's upholding that hop character. That's the way these styles kind of develop, right? As people experimenting with different amounts and such. So just keep that in mind. I don't think it's the 2% ABV difference personally, but that may play a small role. Who knows? Next question comes from John Boyle, who says, what's really the sweet spot for drinking IPAs? I've read online that as fresh as possible isn't always best, that even 3 weeks in the keg is best.
So when I read this question, my answer is going to be, well, that depends, because I think what he's referring to is in a lot of hazy IPAs, there is this kind of, hop bite that kind of comes from, these massive dry hop additions where this bitterness does occur. And it does take some amount of time for kind of that hop bite to like kind of fade out of the beer a little bit. And so, is that going to be the same for every IPA you ever drink? Probably not. So I'm assuming a lot of these commercial breweries that brew the same batches over and over and over again kind of have an idea of when that flavor is fading out and when it's best to actually put on tap. And they probably have really good timing with that within their brewing schedules, within their tap rooms. As a home brewer who makes a lot of different recipes, I would just say if you get it in the keg and you put it on tap and it tastes too bitter and doesn't taste like you want to taste it, give it a couple of weeks, taste it again. I have a double IPA recipe that really takes around 3 to 4 weeks, to really kind of mellow out enough to be like a really, really good beer. And then about another 3 weeks later, all the flavor that I was enjoying 3 weeks ago is pretty well on its way out. So I really just think it depends on the beer, on the hops used, on what your process is. But I would just say that it is ready when it is ready, and you'll know.
Yeah. So to sum that up, that's your opinion, man, right? I mean, what's best is so subjective. I've got friends who will make an IPA, usually not of the hazy sort, and when they're done kegging it, they add even more hops to the keg, which, if you're trying to age out that hop burn or the potential for that, you're not going to toss more into the keg. And they're drinking it within 3 or 4 days of kegging it, and they're saying that's the best. And then I've got other friends who swear, and this is no joke, you got to let IPA mellow out in the keg for 3 to 4 weeks before it really hits its stride. I kind of fall somewhere in between there. I like my IPA to be clear. And so to me, that might mean I'm adding gelatin. It might mean I'm letting it sit for 5 or 6 days after I keg. I also keg mostly clear beer. So I've got that working for me, but it really is your opinion. I mean, some people might like that kind of astringent hop fuzzy thing that you get from a freshly kegged IPA. Other people may not. Now, if you're talking about, entering into a competition, what's best? Well, yeah, I hate to break it to you, but judges rely on their subjective preferences as well. As much as we like to pretend we don't, that is just the way it works. If I drink a beer that fits within my realm of this is amazing, and somebody else disagrees, now we're having a conversation about that, my judging partner, and we're finding a happy medium on that. So it really is, you got to go with what you like the best. What's interesting is it does seem that the collective palate, if you will, of brewers and beer drinkers does seem to converge on certain things. I'm not entirely sure what all that is for every single style, but I would say that, for the majority of IPA, it's going to be probably 5 to 10 days in the keg, and then people tend to find that to be kind of ideal in that range. So if you're looking for a specific number, there you have it. But again, do what works best for you, I think is always when it comes to beer at the very least, it's always going to be my response.
All right. Well, our next question comes from James Bywater, who is an awesome guy, by the way. Thanks for asking questions, James, and being a patron. We love you. You know that. So top 3 beers if someone else is paying.
This is easy for me. I would honestly, I would throw Miller Lite on that list because it's what I drink the most, and I drink the most of it because I love it as much as I do. But if somebody else is paying, I think I know what James is getting at here. Now, James is one of our patrons who joins us pretty much every month on our just kind of hangout video session that we do for patrons at a certain level. And so we know him well, and I kind of know what he's getting at here. He wants to know what craft beers, if somebody else is paying, right? We don't have to worry about the money. Would we pick? And I've got mine are pretty easy. In no particular order, I'm going to go with probably Chuckanut Brewing Company's, probably their Pilsner, their German Pilsner. I'm going to go with Wayfinder Beer Company's, their CZ Pils. That's their Czech Pilsner. That is absolutely phenomenal. And I'm going to go with Freem Family Brewers out of, I believe they're in Mount Hood, Oregon. I'm going to go with their Pilsner as well. So not much craziness going on there, but that is what I want all the time, every time, and it will never get old. It is yet to get old for me. So those are the 3 that I'm picking, James.
Well, I'm adding a little caveat onto my answers because my assumption is that James is paying for me to travel to these places along with getting the beer. And so first, James is taking me to West Flanders, Belgium, and we're going to have West Flanders 12 there at the Abbey. It's a really amazing beer. I haven't had one in a really long time, but there's something special about being in the biggest hop producing region in Belgium at an Abbey cafe, having what some proclaim to be the best beer in the world, and it really is a good beer. Well, I say it's the best in the world. Hard to say, but it is in one of my top 5. The next place James is going to be traveling me towards is we're going to go to Munich, and we're going to have Augustiner Brau Festbier in their tent at Oktoberfest because that is just such a lovely beer. It's great. It's got that subtle malt backbone, but it's just super crushable. Perfect for any time you want to crush 5 to 6 liters of beer in a sitting. And then the last one is really hard. I've had Pliny the Elder, but never at the source. So I'd really kind of like to go to Russian River and have some Pliny just at the source. One of my favorite triples in the world and one of my favorite places in the world is Bruges, Belgium. And so, if I could be convinced to go to, Bruges and have De Geer triple there at the only place where you can get it on tap. The last one's pretty hard for me, but I feel like those are pretty solid destinations for good beer, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about traveling to the place to drink the beers, I think I would change my. I used to live in Bellingham, where Chuckanut is at, or I believe used to be at this point. We drive through Portland almost every year. That's where Wayfinder's at, and Mount Hood is only about an hour and a half from there. So, if we're traveling, I'm going to probably Munich, Germany, like you said, back to Prague, and drinking all of their Czech Pilsner there, the Pilsner Urquell, and then I'd probably go to. I mean, I think I'd be following you basically because I don't care much for West Vleteren 12. I don't think it's anywhere near the best beer in the world. I don't know who would ever make such a claim. It's pretty good. To me, it tastes like grape Jolly Ranchers, but I'd probably drink. I'd go to Cantillon and just drink everything they've got, at Cantillon. So good question, James. Thanks for doing that for us. It's kind of making me envious of this like hypothetical that doesn't even exist at this point. But next question comes from Bradley Jennings. He's a local brewer here in Fresno who also happens to be a patron. Should you use separate equipment when you're using Brett or just when using lacto and PDO post boil?
Wow, this is a really great question. And since I don't do a ton of mixed firm stuff, you're asking someone with a very small amount of experience doing this kind of thing. So congrats, you landed on the perfect Brü A to have your question answered very mediocrely. So here we go, man. But from what I understand, Brett can be kind of a nasty little booger to get out of gear. It can hide really fun places. If it was me, I would try to find ways to add Brett to beer that doesn't involve kind of my clean side equipment. I know Orval has this thing where when they do their Abbey de Orval beers, they actually add Brett to the bottle for the bottle conditioning component. Yeah. And so that way you're keeping all your clean stuff clean. And then when you go into bottling, you're adding just a smidge of Brett, and that's chewing through the rest of the sugars and actually carbonating the beer and gives it a cool little character. It's a cool beer to check out if you've never had it. Another place would be is like if you have like a separate, barrel, a separate carboy, something else that you don't mind adding Brett to after the fact for it to go do its work? Because my understanding, I know that you can add Brett during fermentation when it's active, but my understanding is that most of its work that you're looking for it to do is kind of after the fact, because it's going for the things that your yeast wouldn't eat. And so that's kind of where I would go with it. But again, my experience level on this is pretty low.
So I've got a little bit more experience than you, it seems, Will, using both Brett and these other bugs, these other microbes, souring microbes. Here's the deal. If you are using, say, plastic buckets or even PET carboys, I'm going to get back to that in a minute, and you plan on developing a sort of a funky or sour program in your home brewery, then I think it's actually worth it to just go buy another one of those, and you reserve those just specifically for these funky and sour beers. Even if it's just insurance, buckets cost like $12, I think, and you can get one of these PET plastic carboys for like $23 at More Beer. Again. It's good insurance. You can also use that while you've got other clean stuff, in your fermentation chamber or whatever. That being said, I was very curious about this because, like, it sounds like Bradley, probably experienced. When you're learning about brewing and you start kind of dipping your toes into this wild and funky world, a lot of people, there's a lot of fear, we'll say, behind using these other microbes that are not Saccharomyces, right? That they're going to stick around. And you read about how wineries, boy, they do everything they can to keep anything other than the yeast they want to ferment with out of their, fermentation tanks and all of this stuff. So when I started using these, that's sort of what I did. And then I was curious one time. I had made a 100% Brett fermented beer. And it was really nice. It turned out great. It was like this super pineapple, bready pineapple thing that was really, really nice. And I did that in a PET plastic carboy. So I washed that out, and I think I was making a Kolsch or something. And I thought, if this goes bad, it's only going to be because of the Brett, unless, of course, I did something else that I was unaware of. But it's only going to be because of the Brett, and I'm okay with that. So let's see how this turns out. That beer came out just as clean as everything else every other Kolsch I'd ever made. That thing was on tap for probably, 4 to 6 weeks is pretty typical for me. And it never turned. It never developed a Brett character. So, did I get lucky? I don't think so. I did it multiple times after that. And I really stopped worrying about it because I didn't have like an established funky and sour program in my brewery. So to me, it was just like, as long as I'm, cleaning these things really well and sanitizing them properly, I'm pretty good to go. Now, if you're using stainless steel, I wouldn't worry about it. The areas you might want to worry are like in your tubing, which is plastic and arguably very difficult to clean, much more so than a large open fermentation vat. And so that that's a little freaky to me. Who knows what's getting left in there? But yeah, I don't think there's really, if you're using stainless steel, I don't think you really have much to worry about. Just make sure you clean that stuff well. And I know we all have different ideas of what cleaning and sanitation looks like. I'm a hyper nut about it, so that may be why I've been able to get away with it. But again, if you're using plastic, particularly HDPE, your standard fermentation bucket, I would recommend just going and grabbing another one and using that specifically for your sour and funky stuff.
All right. The next question is from my buddy Dick Wallace, who lives here in San Antonio. We actually just had beers at Live Oak fairly recently over some Franklin barbecue. So he asked, you absolutely must get a rather large homebrew or beer related tattoo. What are you getting and where is it going?
This is little insider information here. I have 0 tattoos. I often tell people that I've got commitment issues. It's just the other way, like the opposite direction of when most people refer to that term, right? Commitment issues. I overcommit to things. When it comes to tattoos, I have to know for a fact that whatever I get, I'm not going to be pissed off that I got it 10 years down the road. And so far, every idea I had when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, I'm so glad I didn't do. So far, I feel validated with that. I do have some ideas for tattoos. They don't involve anything beer or brewing related. But if I were forced to get something that had to do, a tattoo that had to do with beer or brewing stuff, I feel like this is an easy one for me. I would get our copyrighted Brutron logo tattoo, probably on my left forearm, like on the inside of my left forearm, where it's not terribly visible to everybody, but it's also not hidden so that I don't feel like I got it for no reason whatsoever. So that's what I would get. Our Brutron is just the neutron thing that has our stuff on it and whatnot. So that's where I'm going. I don't, I think hop binds look really pretty. I think the whole barley stalks look cool. That's just not something I would want, permanently on my body.
Yeah, I have to be honest as well. I have 0 tattoos as well. So how did he get so lucky? But I do have a pretty creative imagination, and assuming that I wouldn't have buyer's remorse here in about a week, I think it might be neat to get like a hop bind sleeve, like going up your arm. Like that'd be pretty cool to have like the hop bind sleeve. That might be interesting. My more kind of elaborate idea is you get like 2 dimpled Czech beer glasses with a tulip in the middle to make kind of a flying thing on your back out of some fun glassware.
Like angel wings, Will? Is that
yeah?
Where you're going
it's like dimpled Pilsner Urquell angel wings.
Okay.
so that, but I'm kind of with you. I definitely kind of thought about the buyer's remorse, and I always figured if I was going to get a tattoo, and this is for me, I'm not judging anyone who has tattoos because I really don't care. I would get "I'm dumb" on my forehead because that would explain it here in another month when I regret getting it.
Yeah, mistake made. So I actually love tattoos. I think they look amazing. My brother has basically a full sleeve on his left arm, and then he's working on his right arm. I believe, and his girlfriend is the same way. She's actually run in some competition for Inked magazine right now because she has so many tattoos. I think they look awesome. I'm afraid I'm going to pick something and then be like, oh man, I can't get rid of it now. Buyer's remorse or whatever you want to call it. I do have some ideas though. My oldest daughter's name is Hazel, and my youngest daughter's name is Olive, and my son, who's sandwiched between the two of them, is Roscoe. Well, Roscoe I believe is like some Norse thing or a Scandinavian thing for like a deer forest. And then you've got hazel trees and olive trees. So I was thinking it'd be cool to have like a full sleeve, like a hazel tree on my left arm and then the olive tree on my right arm with like a buck and a doe, like for the deer for this is the thing though, is I have to have whatever I do has to have some semblance of meaning behind it. Like I'm not just going to do something because I think it looks cool. It has to mean something. Because then if I start to regret it later, at least I can remind myself, well, it wasn't for naught. There's something underneath this besides just the cool image or like the Chinese character or whatever it is. So, but that's where I'm at. The chances that you're going to see me with a beer brewing related tattoo before you see me in a casket are very, very slim. So that's just where I'm at with that. So, well, we do have to take a short break. We're going to be back answering more patron questions right after these messages. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Chilling wort can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Xchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brulosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Xchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Xchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to Xchillerator.com today.
Looking for for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this basketball season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. You can turn $10 into $250. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/fan and use code FAN. That's code FAN at prizepicks.com/fan.
Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
All righty, we've got another pile of questions to get to. Will, why don't you kick us off on this one?
Sure. Our next question comes from Andrew Hoddenfield, and he says, I'm new to kegging, and so far I love the time savings and lack of oxidation. My question pertains to CO2. Is there a difference between beverage CO2 or other types? I get my tanks filled by the same place a metal shop would fill their tanks for non-beverage work. I read some CO2, when stored, can contain unhealthy chemicals. I'm still alive, but can't help but think about the quality of CO2 with each sip of homebrew.
I'm still alive as well, and and I've been using welding CO2 or CO2 purchased from a welding supply store the entire time I've been kegging. So here's the deal: I did a little research on this recently, but all it did was confirm what I had read, 10 years ago when I built my first kegerator. And the reality is this, that if you are buying CO2 from, say, a paintball store, right? And you're using those paintball canisters, so they're the ones filling up your CO2, they don't have to claim that it's food safe. And that seems to be the concern that a lot of people have, is that they don't, since they're not the intended use there is not for food, it's not for consumption, they don't have to make that claim. And then the assumption from that then would be that, well, if it's not food safe, then we shouldn't be ingesting it. Well, the problem is that most of the CO2 that all of these places are getting, from the research that I've done at least, and maybe I'm wrong on this, it's all coming from the same source or from similar sources. They're providing it to the welding shops, they're providing it to the paintball stores, and they're providing it to the folks who are at beverage places and doing these beverage things. I have never noticed a difference. So I used to get my CO2 tanks filled as opposed to replaced. I used to get them actually filled at a beverage supply store right here in Fresno. I drive all the way downtown. It's an old school place that's been around for quite a while now. They'd take my tanks back, they'd attach it to their machine, they'd fill them up and send me on my way. And it was relatively inexpensive. Well, then one day I was out of CO2 and they were closed. Their hours were not very conducive to me driving, 20 minutes down there and 20 minutes back on a weekend. But what was open was like I said, a welding supply shop. And I went in there and they do trades. You don't fill up your tank there. They swap them out. And what I found was, first off, no noticeable impact in terms of flavor or quality of carbonation or anything like that. That was never an issue. And while I was there, I asked the guys, hey, there's this whole issue about food grade or beverage CO2 versus this stuff. He goes, you're not the first to ask that. Welders have to have pure CO2 because of to make these sanitary welds. And so the way their explanation was, you have nothing to worry about. And he's like, there are businesses that get their CO2 from us for their soda or for their beer applications and stuff like that. You have nothing to worry about. And so I tend to take the word of a person like that, which corroborates a lot of what I read online, over some people, on Reddit or Homebrew Talk who are just scared because their paintball shop said, hey, this isn't food grade, So that's my take on it. Again, there's a lot of anecdote in that. I've never had the CO2 I use, tested in a lab or anything like that. But I think it's fine. I think it's fine.
I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I get my tanks refilled at a paintball shop, and I've had conversations with them as well. And the place that my paintball shop is getting CO2 from is the same place that provides the exact same CO2 tanks in 40-pound bottles to all sorts of food and beverage places all over town, to bars. So to me, it's kind of like, and I've read the crazy stories on the internet where I read something somewhere that was, oh yeah, well, they'll put like oil inside of the CO2 for paintball guns. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. The last thing you want in that gas system is like extra oil or anything in there to gum it all up. So really, honestly, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I'm sure you can ask them, but I'm 90% certain that whatever you're getting from this, your supply place, it's probably the same stuff that they're getting everywhere else. And just like Marshall said, all those weird little particulates or little things in there that would mess up your beer, they don't want that messing up their gear either at a metal shop or their paintball pneumatic systems and a paintball gun. So it's probably perfectly fine, but you can always ask them just to be sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just don't think there's anything really to be concerned about if you're doing that. Now, obviously, if you're carbonating beer, I've used this welding CO2 to carbonate just straight water, and it tastes like regular old carbonated water. If you're getting some weird flavor out of it or some weird aroma, your beers start to have issues, then of course, that might be something you want to take a look at. But until then, now, again, we this is just friendly advice from a couple dudes who've been doing this for a long time. This is not us telling you that you have to do it one way or that there are no issues with it. It's just been our experience that there really is not much to worry about there. Next question comes from Quentin Keats, who says, I live in a northern Canadian town and have to order all of my brew supplies, which takes weeks to arrive. Liquid yeast is out of the question. I was wondering if there's a dry ale yeast that works as well as a liquid yeast for helping hops interact with beer, aroma, taste, biotransformation, etc. I generally brew 4 to 5% ABV American Pale Ale and IPA with low to moderate bitterness, but I look for that big hop aroma and punch. I usually pitch my yeast dry on top of 23 liters of wort. That's right around 6 gallons of wort.
So, I live in Texas where it's hot, and so I relate to this question a lot because during the summertime, ordering liquid yeast a lot of times is kind of taking your life into your own hands, basically, because a lot of times it's going to be super hot by the time it gets here. And even though you pay the extra $1 for the ice pack or whatever, that shop that you're ordering from, halfway across the country probably isn't going to get it to you in the best condition, unfortunately, just because of, the way nature is and the way heat is. But the good news is there are a ton of options out there in a dry format. If you're into the more traditional Chico strain, you can use USO5, which is similar to Flagship. I know Lallemand has a Verdant strain, which is a British strain that they like to use for hazy IPA out there. And they're just, the sky's the limit now with dry yeast options, unlike it was, say, 5-6 years ago when it just doesn't seem like there was that much out there. So there are some really good charts online that show good dry yeast substitutes for a lot of common liquid yeast brands out there. So I would just get on the internet and use some Google Foo and try to find some of those charts out there and just, do some split batches, do some small batches, just go out there and play and find what works best for you and what you like to drink.
Yeah, great advice there, Will. I agree with you on all of that. There are so many more dry yeast options than there were even just 5 or 6 years ago. Lallemand is doing a lot to increase the availability of such options for people who prefer dry options or, who like, it sounds like Quentin kind of have to use dry yeast options. There's another company called Cellar Science that is getting a lot of attention lately. I believe they are sold. I don't think it's exclusive, but you can find most of their dry yeast options at More Beer. So check that out. They offer free shipping as well. Here's the thing, though, Quentin, is you live in a northern Canadian town, which says to me that your issue isn't one of heat, but one of lower temperatures, of cooler temperatures. There are likely, I'm going to take it takes weeks to arrive. So let's go extreme and say it takes a whole month. You order something from More Beer and it takes a month to arrive. Let's say, I'm thinking if you order it in March, in the beginning of March, you could order probably a good number of, say, Imperial yeast or some other liquid yeast brand, and they ship it, and it's not going to get too hot. Yeast does not have to be refrigerated. It extends the life, arguably, to some degree. But sitting at if it's getting shipped to you in March and you're in northern Canada, chances are it's not going to get much over 65 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what, like 17 or 16 degrees C, anyways, on its way to your place. That yeast is going to be fine. I know some people don't want to hear me say that, but we've done comparisons of yeast that's been left out on the counter, at 75 degrees, and it works fine. If you're building up a starter, you're even bettering your chances of a positive outcome. So, I understand the ease and the lack of worry that goes along with not having to with using dry yeast because of the shipping issues and all of that. But I don't think it's completely out of the question. It might be something you experiment with, in fact. But again, there are a lot of dry yeast options available these days for folks who prefer dry yeast or have to use dry yeast, not just the Chico strain. Now, I've used certain dry yeasts that I just happen not to be a big fan of. They do seem to create or produce a noticeable difference compared to their liquid counterparts, like the Chico strains. My preference has been for the liquid ones so far, but yours might be for the dry. So, again, test these things out. Brew a couple batches side by side and see for yourself. If you like the liquid yeast, I'm sure there are options for getting you some. But again, it sounds to me as an IPA person, I don't know if you're into the hazy thing or the clear thing, but if you're going for hazy, I would give that verdant yeast a shot. I've heard a lot of really positive stuff about that one.
Our next question is from Victor Fernandez Guso, and he says, one of my favorite episodes was the one from a few years ago where you guys talked about children and brewing beer. As your kids would have grown up a bit since then, has anything changed? Have you given them a new role or involved the family in a different way, like perhaps allowing them to pour your beer? To me, beer and brewing is all about sharing the experience as well as the end product with the people I care about most. So I always enjoy talking with others about it.
So here's a neat thing. That was episode 99. It was a Brews Views episode called On Drinking and Brewing with Children. We released that in July of 2019. So over 4 years ago now. 201 episodes ago. Has anything changed? Well, all of my kids are older, like you said, Victor. And so, yeah, I guess things have changed a little bit. Their experience on my end, I'm actually really curious to hear your experience, Will, because I know you've got some kiddos as well. My kids don't necessarily have the same perspective of beer in particular. I would say beer, not brewing. Of beer as a lot of their friends do, because they are so inundated with the whole beer and brewing thing because of Brewlosophy. They can go out, they know that they can just go out to the garage and there's going to be beer there, whether that's on tap, in the fridge, or whatever. And it's a very normal part of our life. There's never been an issue with, dad going out and grabbing a beer. I might have one of my kids, hey, I'm sitting here busy doing something right now. Can you go grab me such and such beer out of the fridge, please? They all know how to use the taps on my Keyser, in part because we've made soda and we do sparkling water, and they're free to go drink all of the sparkling water they want. So they know how to do that. So yeah, that's there. But I also don't have, and this was, I remember when we were preparing for that episode, that Brews Views episode, I was really anxious, and there's this part of me, I think it's kind of natural, maybe not, but for you don't want to send the wrong message to listeners, to other people out there, whoever that may be. And I didn't want to make it sound like, we encourage our kids to drink, and we don't do that. I'm absolutely against that. We do things often that involve drinking, camping namely. And when we're out there, we're not the parents who are like allowing our kids to drink a can of beer just because, we're in a different environment. No way in hell are we going to do that. But we want them to have a responsible perspective of drinking and brewing and all of that stuff. So it is interesting because back then I was really anxious talking about it. And now that was a very, very popular episode, by the way. We got a ton of feedback on it. We still, kind of like you here, Victor, we still hear about people who are curious about our perspectives on this whole thing. I don't have a puritanical perspective of alcohol. I was raised with that. I've very intentionally abandoned that. And so I view it as just another thing. It's no more damaging than, these kids who keep their noses in their iPads all day long. Now, yes, don't get me wrong. There's an argument to be made that alcohol is more damaging than that. But what I'm saying is being around it, having parents who are responsible and being around it, whether that's brewing, drinking, or whatever. So, my kids have access to it. We don't hide it from them. I would never want to hide something like that from them. And so I would say that, as weird as this sounds, my children who do not drink, they range in age from 10 to 14. We got a 13-year-old in the middle there. They all have a healthy relationship with alcohol. And that's an odd thing to say because they don't drink, but their parents do. They're aware of that. And do we get them involved? My youngest daughter, Olive, She's the only one who has any interest in this stuff at this point. My two older ones have zero interest in anything that has to do with, I think, anything that their dad thinks is cool, But my youngest one is always telling me, I can't wait to take over Brulosophy. She kind of has that mindset, and she does like the taste of beer still. So I'll give her little sips now and again, and there's nothing wrong with that. But she and I do have kind of more similar personalities as well. So I guess that's my response to that question.
Yeah, so this is a really great question, and that is an episode that I remember resonating with me when I listened to it. I think it was kind of a great overview of kind of, and what people define as healthy boundaries varies from person to person, parent to parent, and that's okay. But I think it kind of like gave a good overview of what people that are in this kind of hobby and in this kind of industry, where they kind of are with this. And, and my daughter, who's my oldest, she's the rule follower, and essentially, Audrey, she doesn't mind like helping me measure out, salt additions or the grain, or she even likes her favorite part, which is something that scares the crud out of me. She likes to dump the bucket of unmilled grain into the hopper on the, on my grain mill, which, it's not that she's going to hurt anything. It's just that she tends to make a big mess because she misses it. So, so she likes to help out with all sorts of those things, but she's kind of like, waned away from that. And I've kind of said, hey, I brewed this? Do you want to try it? And she's like, no, I don't want anything to do with it. She won't drink it at all. So it's really hilarious. And then I say something about, we're going to go somewhere. And it's like, what, to another brewery, Daddy? What, to get more beer, Daddy? And it's like more annoyed and like disdainful than anything else. And so as far as like her relationship with alcohol, it's like she gets kind of annoyed by it, which I guess if you get overexposed to something, maybe that's something. Now my son, who is 6, it's a little different. He's more of an adventurous person, and so we have been out, and he has asked for like a sip of beer or a sip of something, and I'm not one to deny him a sip. I'm not going to let him sit down with a whole can or a whole glass or anything like that. But if he wants a sip of beer, that's perfectly fine. And some of the stuff, he just like looks at me and makes a nasty face and shakes his head and gives me a thumbs down. Every now and then he looks at me and gives me a thumbs up. So, I don't know what that says about it, but, I'm not one to like hide that from him. Obviously, we have beer all over the place. We have, multiple taps of beer all around, some in the living room, some in the garage. And so I'm not trying to hide it from my kids. In fact, the other day, I had some root beer on tap last month, and my son went over and he was going to pour his own root beer off the tap, and he's 6, and so my wife was kind of freaking out about it. I'm like, no, he's a natural. Watch this. And he went over there and he straight up poured it with perfect head and everything, his root beer. And I'm like, it's like, it must run in the family, I guess. Here he is. So that's pretty fun. But we have some root beer and fizzy water on tap that we and my daughter doesn't like the hop water so much, but my son actually likes the hop water. So we encourage them to drink that anyways, because again, it's no calories, because I'm not adding any sugar to it. It's actually a pretty healthy thing to drink. So, and then the other stuff, they know what the boundaries are, and we've talked a lot about it to the point where they are annoyed to talk about it anymore.
I get I can relate with getting the eye rolls, and like, my wife will be on the road driving up to Seattle or something, and my wife will be like, oh, hey babe, where do you want to stop and eat? And the kids are like, brewery, here we go, another one. But my youngest, like I said, Olive, she'll be the one to come up to me and she's like, hey, we going to Crow and Wolf this weekend? I want to hang out. And it's cool because, all the breweries in town that we go to are all very family friendly, and you show up and our friends who brew there, our friends who drink there all the time, they're usually there with their kids. All the kids hang out and do their thing. That's just the type of community that we're after, that we enjoy. So again, I'd rather my kids have one tiny little sip of a pale lager that their dad brewed than consume so much of the crap that's on store shelves these days anyways. So judge me all you like, and I'll keep my judgments to myself. But next question. This is actually Calvin Bell asked 2 questions. So we'll read the first one, respond to that, and then we'll move on to a second question. The first one, he says, I'm relatively new to homebrewing, but jumped into all grain and kegging right off the hop. Way to go, Calvin. How do you all temper the desire to get new gear and try new things against the desire to just brew good beer and enjoy?
Well, Calvin, to answer your question, not very well. I'm not very good at tempering that desire. There's always some little gadget, and sometimes it's like something cheap. Like there's like this Picnic Tap 2.0 that it's like it just sits on a ball lock. It's only about like 2 inches long, but it's like a picnic tap, and somehow it pours beer from this 2-inch tube, which I find fascinating how it works, because there's a little plastic spiral inside of there that somehow helps diffuse the gas as it's going through that tube. And then sometimes you get bigger things where you want to get new brewing systems, new fermenters, new kegerator upgrades. And so I think one of the kind of fun things here is there's a bunch of new gear out there. It's probably the reason I've never broken even on this hobby that's supposed to save me money, according to what I told my wife 10 years ago. So I'm probably not that good at it. But what I will say is that the downside, if you're looking for a downside to constantly getting new gear, is that a lot of times you have to learn about these new systems. So if you get a new all-in-one brewing system, there's a learning curve there. And so you're going to probably use the first 3-4 batches trying to get acquainted with that system. Not saying you'll produce bad beer, but your likelihood of making a mistake or producing a less than desirable beer goes up. And so there is like a good part of familiarity that goes in with not getting new gear all the time, but I get new stuff all the time. I got more recently, I had some of the like Duotite inline pressure regulators for my gas side, and I just had to get the stupid little digital faces to go on them to give me the digital pressure gauge versus the analog pressure gauge that was on there. So sometimes I'm not spending like hundreds of dollars for new gadgets and gears, but it's really quick on that Duotite stuff. Especially you get on more beer and you just put like 4 things in your cart, and suddenly it keeps adding up, and you're at $100 worth of Duotite, which seems ridiculous because it's so cheap.
Yeah, that's a lot of Duotite fittings for sure. Here's the deal, Calvin. My oldest daughter, Hazel, she is a shiny thing lover, so she likes new shiny things, and it's a joke that my wife and I make with her. I don't really have that. I am in the same way that I am dorkily obsessed with like documentaries over fantasy. I feel like it comes from the same vein that I don't care so much if it's new. I don't care about the latest and greatest. But if it makes the experience better, then that's usually what I will, consider dropping money on. And so pretty much every jump that I've made in my brewing gear over the last 20 years has been because of some change in my approach and me looking to get something that was more efficient, not in terms of like brewing efficiency, but in terms of my actual brewing and my brew day. So for example, when I went from extract to all grain, I jumped into batch sparge, and I was using a 70 quart, ice chest cooler, MLT, and that worked great. And then, but now I'm doing, I've got the mash tun, and I collect my sweet wort out of that, and I put it into my kettle. So you've still got the mash tun, you've still got the kettle. And then when I realized, hey, this whole brew in a bag thing isn't creating bad beers. In fact, people are winning awards with their brew in a bag beers. And I jumped into that. Now I wanted the most efficient way to do that, which also meant going electric. So now, it looks big, new, and shiny, but I'm getting rid of so much stuff and swapping it out with this much smaller footprint, single vessel brewing system thing that I absolutely love, So that's really the stuff that I did. Another example of my kind of desire for a more efficient and more enjoyable brew day was when I decided to plumb my garage with natural gas. It's cheaper than propane, so one could argue that it was actually a cost saving measure, and it was very cheap to plumb it because the wall that I installed the natural gas on, it was literally the other side of it was our natural gas main. So it was very easy. We just ran some tubing over or whatever. But that's not big and shiny and noticeable. It just makes the brew day better. That's the kind of stuff that I spend my money and my focus on. So Calvin's next question, he says, I'm getting tired of lifting kegs into my Keezer. Would you recommend a converted fridge with taps on the door, so a kegerator, or a large commercial kegerator that can hold at least 4 kegs with room for extra bottles and in cans. If I'm reading this correctly, I think what Calvin might be referring to with that second bit are like the actual commercial kegerators with the door that's closer to the bottom, up to the floor. So you're just kind of barely lifting up the keg and putting it in, as opposed to a keezer. What are your thoughts? I mean, what would you recommend?
So, I mean, how much money do you want to spend? That's kind of, what's going to break you here, or what's reasonable. What I use personally is I have a kegerator that I made out of an old apartment refrigerator that I bought off of like Craigslist or something. And essentially it fits 4 kegs. I had to drill kind of a hole in the side of it to get a gas line to go out so I could put my CO2 bottle outside to fit 4 kegs inside of it. And if most of those refrigerators, if you open them up and look at them, it goes straight back, and then there's kind of a little step on the back where some of the compressor and things are sitting. And so you kind of have to build like a shelf and then make sure there's enough room between that shelf and the top to be able to fit whatever kegs you're using, whether those are pin lock or ball lock kegs, and whatever height of keg that you need. But I have one and it fits 4 kegs, and then I have the taps in the door, and it works out pretty well. And then I have a spot to put my hops in the freezer on top. And so I'm kind of a fan of that particular style. But if somebody wanted to gift me a large commercial kegerator that can hold a handful of kegs and then have some extra room in there, like, I have no problem with that. But those are going to be a little bit more expensive. But maybe you can find a screaming deal on Craigslist or somewhere from a restaurant that's shutting down or something.
Yeah, those kegerators, the commercial kegerators are really cool. I mean, no pun intended. They're really neat. I think they'd be cool to have around in your garage. The thing is that they're really wide. I like the footprint of a refrigerator in my garage, and I also like building things. So that's what I would do. The only reason I moved away from a keezer to a kegerator was because I was no longer able to fill my 7-tap keezer with 7 kegs of beer. I just wasn't brewing nearly as much as I had to when we were building Brewlosophy. We had more contributors, and now my focus is way more on managing this beast. So I only needed 3 taps. And so, the issues that I've had with my kegerator are very small. I love having, like you said, Will, I love having the freezer for storing hops. I'll throw bags of ice in there when I'm preparing to go camping, so I don't have to run to the store that morning. It's really nice just to have that extra freezer space. But the biggest issue that I've had with my kegerator is that we have a pretty standard apartment type refrigerator that I use for the kegerator with 2 crisper doors on the bottom. Well, the glass shelf, that bottom glass shelf, I did not want to break that. So I took that out and I replaced it with some pretty thick plywood. And even that can barely withhold, 3 full kegs without really warping and bending. And so that's the issue that I'm having is I'm trying to come up with what's the best solution for that bottom shelf, that's going to last a long time. But other than that, I mean, it's really, energy efficient because it's I bought my fridge new. I wanted a black one. It's really energy efficient. I really like the way the black Nuka taps look on the black fridge, stuff like that. You have mostly full control over how, it's going to turn out because you're the one building it. So that's what I would do. Also, I think it's going to be a lot cheaper to do that. I think my kegerator, and I bought everything brand new. I was lucky because I sold my keezer for a pretty good penny. And so I had enough to totally cover the cost of my brand new kegerator. And I still think it was like right around $1,000. I don't think you're going to find a commercial kegerator like that for under $2,000 or $3,000.
Yeah, if you go online right now to More Beer and you look at some of their kegerators that they're just selling that are like 3 and 4 tap with a tower on top, they're going for roughly $1,000 new out of the box. So that's just for like a 3 or 4 tap thing off More Beer. So and most of the time they're well over $1,000. So, go look at that. But, for the shelf part of it, I took out those crisper drawers altogether and all the plastic associated with it. And I actually have some like kind of 2x4s that I kind of put underneath it and kind of, put some screws in it to keep them in place. And that keeps it from bending too much on the front end of that for me. So there are challenges there, but I'm kind of with you. I think it's going to be much more economical for you to go with the fridge route on this.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's what I would do at the very least, Calvin. I've never even considered buying one of the commercial kegerators. So
Cool. All right. Well, the next question is from Bill Gade, and he says, I used the Brü bag method, and I was a little low on the post-mash gravity on my last couple of batches. So I heated the water to 180 F and put the bag back in for 20 minutes, sort of like a sparge. Do you recommend this, or should I add liquid extract or sugar to raise the gravity?
Well, here's the thing, Bill. You didn't tell us if it helped with your gravity. Did it increase your OG at all? I'm curious. This is a process that I've heard referred to as dip sparging. So, brew in a bag, the whole idea behind it is it simplifies the brewing process because for the most part, you're doing a full spar or a no sparge or full volume mash, meaning all of your grains go into all of your full volume of water. You pull them out, you squeeze it, you move on, you start to boil. If you're getting lower efficiency than you're happy with, I mean, I get a little bit lower efficiency with brew in a bag. I just don't care. It's like 3 or 4 points lower than when I was batch sparging, and that more than makes up for, the hassle of having to sparge and do all that stuff. So, but if you're dip sparging and you're seeing an increase in your gravity and that's desired, then by all means keep doing it. I don't think you're hurting anything whatsoever. When it comes to sparging, the only issues that I've ever really heard about with sparging is the extraction of tannins by over sparging, and that is really only a problem with continuous or fly sparge, that method, and it's mostly a function of pH. So it's very difficult to extract tannins from grains, as it turns out, particularly in the brewing process, at least. So yeah, dip it if you want to, bud. But I don't think you're going to run into any issues with that. Or you could just use a little bit more grain when you're brewing styles that are going to result in lower gravity. I mean, that's what I would do.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at on this. Like, so if you're kind of consistently lower than you think you should be, so like if you're calculating it at 75% brew house efficiency, but you're actually coming out at 70%, then I would just say adjust down and start making your recipes for 70% brew house efficiency or whatever it happens to be. So a little bit of extra grain, it's not going to hurt anything. What you did, it sounds fine. I know Marshall said it was dip sparging. It makes me think of batch sparging to some degree because it's kind of the same idea here where you're just soaking your grain in hot water, and I don't think there's any problem with this per se, but I would just take some notes every time you brew a batch, and if you're consistently getting around the 70% efficiency mark or whatever that number is, and it's lower than what you've been designing recipes for, adjust down and then just add the grain to make up for it. It's as easy as that, and there's no shame. I know people go out there and they're chasing efficiency, but that's not really my game. I'm chasing consistency, and I think that's Marshall's game as well.
Yeah, 100%. Efficiency is great. Don't get me wrong. I like seeing those numbers, but for me, I want consistency more than I do high numbers. It's not I'm not in a competition with my fly sparge brewing brethren. I don't care about that. For me, it's consistency. So, but before we move on to the next question, to hit on the final thing you asked, should you add liquid extract or sugar to raise the gravity? Sure. I mean, I just use table sugar. I do not like liquid malt extract. It's what I started brewing with, and the fact I'm still here today, it surprises me because every beer I've ever made with liquid malt extract tastes like homebrew to me. And so I stay away from that stuff. I would add dry malt extract, or my preference is just to add table sugar. Usually that's the route I go with styles like double IPA, or if I'm making a high gravity Belgian beer, something like that. So next question comes from Mangrove Mike. Mangrove Mike says or asks, there are so many hop varieties out there. How do you select and trial new ones that you're interested in? I hear that hop teas aren't ideal. Is it via small batches, or are there better options?
This is a really good question. Maybe more anecdotal, more reading online, but I hear there's a website that has a thing called the Hop Chronicles, and that kind of gives you maybe an idea of like what these hops are doing. But I know that sometimes what you see online, you can't always believe it. You want to try it yourself. Maybe you're worried that this pound of mosaic that you got is going to be a bit more diesely than the one that somebody at Brewlosophy got, which seems like a legitimate concern. So, hop teas, I'm not sure how. I'm with you. I'm not sure how great those actually work, because it's one way to get some of that hop extract and to try it, and maybe it'll give you an idea, but it's not exactly the same. I've tried using hop water as kind of a vessel for trying out new hops. And again, it's not quite the same because water doesn't have any of the proteinaceous things going on in there, and there's no alcohol. There's lots of carbonation, so you do get an idea, but I'm not going to say it's like a perfect idea. I think if I was going to do something other than like our Hop Chronicles recipe that we standardly do, which a lot of those are super easy, especially the pale lager one, just kind of make a pale lager that's lightly hopped, and then you can go in there and see how it does. Or you can more heavily hop it if you're trying to get a little bit more of that pungency to it, and look at our pale ale recipe. But I think you could also just do, I think it was the last Brü A we did, somebody was doing like dry malt extract for one of their experimental batches. And I think dry malt extract, not liquid, as much as just trashed liquid, I'll trash liquid extract too. But dry malt extract isn't bad, and it'd be a super quick, you just get you a little 1 gallon batch or 2 gallon batch going, bring it up to a boil, add your DME, let it go, do a 15-minute addition, a flame out addition, maybe a small dry hop at yeast pitch addition, and then just keg it up real quick and try that out. And that may be a really good way to kind of test out some of these things, and something that's going to have a little more fermentation character and a little more kind of malty backbone to it than something like hop water or hop tea.
Yeah, the hop tea thing has never worked out for me. I've tried it a couple of times, and at least the way that I've made hop tea, I've got a variety of different like tea baskets for like loose leaf tea and stuff like that. And I've just taken a couple of pellets, steeped them in 160 degree water. First time was like, of course there's going to be no bitterness because alpha acids only isomerize, at whatever, 180, whatever degrees. Not true. It's bitter as hell, and it doesn't taste good. And you don't get very much of the hop aroma and flavor from that. To me, it was just this hyper bitter, astringent, watery substance that did not taste good. I chilled it. I did all of that. Didn't work out in my favor. So like you said, Will, the Hop Chronicles, it was the manifestation of this very question that we were asking, is how can we test different hop varieties? And then obviously we wanted to put more of a data spin on that. We wanted to collect real data to see what the collective thought, right? What the hive mind felt about these different hops. Prior to the Hop Chronicles, though, I actually have a recipe. I'll share it with you here in a sec. It's on the website. You can go to brulosophy.com and just search for Hop Test Bitter. It is a 1044 OG, British bitter that I used many times to test out new hop varieties. And it was just what I thought worked well with these different hop varieties, and did a very good job of kind of putting that on display in a more malt forward style of beer that was low gravity. I loved it. So that was all you do is you do. I can't believe how many times I brewed this beer, and I haven't brewed it in so long now. 80% Maris Otter. You're looking at 11% Crystal 60, about 5% Victory Malt, and about 3% of Crystal 120. Very, it's going to produce kind of this reddish colored ale. And then what I do is hop up to 8 to 10 IBU with whatever hop it is that you are wanting to try out. So use that as a first wort hop addition. Again, 8 to 10 IBU. And then I would add 15 grams of Willamette hops at 20 minutes left in the boil. And then for the rest, you're using the hop that you're testing out. Why did I do Willamette there? Willamette and Fuggles are a thing that I kind of stole from Firestone Walker. Matt Brynelson said on a podcast many, many years ago that he likes what I believe he uses, Fuggles, does when added mid-boil for Union Jack IPA. And so I started doing that and just kind of kept doing it. I still do it when I make IPA these days. So anyways, with 10 minutes left in the boil, add 15 grams of your hop of choice, 5 minutes left in the boil, 21 grams of your hop of choice. And then you can do a flame out addition with a 10-minute steep, 21 grams of your hop of choice. And then I very rarely dry hop this because of the style. It is a bitter, but I've heard from people who have dry hopped it as well with upwards of an ounce or so of your hop of choice. And it works out well. It's not going to put on blatant display what the hop characteristics of certain hops are, because it is blended in this other style, this more malty style. But that was what I did for years, and it always worked out well for me. So
what's funny there is I can't remember which podcast it was. It may have been on one of John Hall's podcasts, but they were talking to a commercial brewer, and that's how they tested out new hops is they have their house IPA recipe, and they would essentially just split some of that off and then dry hop it with this new hop. And so the base recipe was basically the same. It's just they were dry hopping it with this new one to see how it played in their base recipe, and then figure out if they wanted to do something more with it from there. And then they weren't out a whole bunch. And so that's a really cool idea. But, so the next question we have here comes from Will Albert, and he says, excluding all base malts, boring. What specialty malt best represents your personality and why? In other words, if you were a specialty malt, which one would you be? Kind of a malty dating game here.
I know, and I thought this would be a fun one to end the episode on. We've already got, I think this is our 16th question, so far more than we usually do in a Brü A. But like I said, we just got so many. So Will, to both of you Wills, Will Allwart, Will Lovell, I thought long and hard about this. I spent at least a good 2 minutes thinking about this before responding. Now, I'm a little bit nutty. I'm also kind of sweet. I've got that sentimental side. I view things through the eyes of somebody with a dose of sentiment and concern and care and love. And so if I had to pick a malt that best represented my personality as being both nutty and sweet, I'd probably go with honey malt because that's what I get from that malt in particular. A lot of people, I remember before I first started using honey malt, people were like, oh, you can never go above 5% because it's just sugary sweet. That's why they call it honey malt. And lo and behold, that is not how I experience it. I've used it at up to 10%, 15%, even in IPA, and it just provides this nice blend of sweet, nutty, honey flavor that I love in so many different styles of beer. So that's what I'm going with. I'm honey malt. You better not pick honey malt, Will. It better be something else.
Well, this is for Bachelorette number 2 to answer your question. Here I am. I'm going to go with the, I think I'm going to go with the pale chocolate. British in origin. So a lot of my ancestry dates back to Britain. So we'll go with that. Pairs well with darker styles and amber style beers, which is kind of my wheelhouse. And, who doesn't love a nice little chocolate flavor there? I think pale chocolate's a good one. It's one of my favorite malts to kind of accent things and, just kind of spice things up a little bit in that chocolatey coffee kind of way, but not too intense.
When I think of pale chocolate, Will, which I have used so much, it's one of my favorite, it's like top 5 favorite specialty malts without a doubt. When I think of that, I think of similarly nutty. It provides this nice roasted nut character to beers when used in the tiniest of amounts, which, you think about it, personality-wise, Will, are you one that really only needs to be taken in small doses? Because that's how I experience pale chocolate.
So I used up to like a pound of it in a stout recipe the other day, and the chocolate aroma in that stout is so wonderful. It is just, it's so amazing. And unlike regular chocolate malt where you get kind of that bitter astringency, not astringency, but that bitterness to go with it, more of that dark chocolate kind of thing going on with the bitterness. Like it was like kind of a smooth thing to add in there. So we're going to go with it. We're smooth here, Marshall. That's what we're going to go with.
Yeah, you are definitely not bitter or astringent. You are far more smooth, as you say. Well, that is all the time we've got for our 300th episode. I'm really stoked that we've made it this far, and I look forward to seeing where we're going to be at in another 300 episodes from now. Thanks again to every single one of our patrons, not just the ones who submitted questions. We are truly humbled by your generosity and your support. Like I mentioned before, we're going to be focusing on more questions asked by patrons in our next Brü A, which should drop in a couple months. And even if you're not a patron, you can ask us whatever you like. Just email questions to feedback@brulosophy.com and make sure to indicate in the subject line that it's for Brü A. We will be sure to add it to the list, which may take some time to get to, but we will get to it. All right, Will, that was a lot of fun. These always are a lot of fun, and I think our patrons have some creative questions that they asked in this episode. Was there anything else you wanted to add before we finish up?
Man, I loved all the questions. I think we had a great mix of serious brewing questions along with some kind of, dating game questions. Thank you, Will Allward. I really appreciate that insightful question. I don't know that I associated Marshall with honey malt, but I learned a lot today. So I'm happy to learn all about all of these things, brewing and non-brewing related, and it's been just fun discussing these ideas to celebrate happy 300 episodes.
Yeah, man, it's what a milestone. I'm really stoked that we made it this far. So, well, don't forget to check out the Brew Lab podcast, where host Kate Jobe takes you into the lab with brewing professionals to discuss the fascinating work they've done on our favorite beverage. And make sure to head to brewlosophy.com to read up on all of the fun beer and brewing stuff we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more. Life is good, the likelihood of me.
Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this basketball season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. You could turn $10 into $250. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/fan and use code FAN. That's code FAN at prizepicks.com/fan.
Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.